Hi, my name is Wafa, and for this video, we will be looking at Lilith, vampirism, and the question of gender over time. Naturally, when we think of contemporary tropes, we tend to wonder about the origin. The same can be said about the vampire. When, where, and how did the vampire myth begin? Who was the first vampire? Why is the first vampire not the most talked about? And the million-dollar question, is it not talked about because it was female? Would Dracula have been so successfully disseminated if it wasn't a man? For this video, which is really more of a literature review on the subject, I attempt to find a way to answer those questions. Though to be honest, I believe these questions will never have a definite answer, which I will explain with the last few articles chosen. The quote-unquote existence of vampires can be traced back all the way to the creation of man. According to the Hebrew legend, Lilith was the first wife of Adam before Eve, and her very existence refutes the story of the original sin. There are many variations to the story, one being that Adam raped Lilith after she refused to consummate her marriage to him, another being that Lilith was banished because she refused to submit to Adam since she was created as his equal, and a more interesting one in which Lilith rebelled and refused to consummate with Adam by exiling herself to hell and vowing to kill all offspring born unto Adam and his new wife Eve. According to Heather Blasdell, the last version is the true one. In his paper, Blasdell analyzes the Lilith archetype in C.S. Lewis's Narnia and Charles Williams' fictions by tracing the origins of Lilith from the fictional to the literal all the way back to Babylonian Jews and Hebrew legends. Quote, according to Hebrew legend, she insisted she was Adam's equal and refused to submit to him in intercourse. Subsequently, she fled the garden, calling out the ineffable name of God, and upon reaching the Red Sea, copulated with demons. When Adam reported her flight to God, he immediately sent 3 angels to recover her. Lilith, however, declared that she would not only not go back to Adam, but would furthermore slaughter any of his offsprings and their descendants if God gave him a second wife. End quote. Furthermore, Blasdell adds that in their literature, C.S. Lewis and Charles Williams used Lilith to represent the evil incarnate and the self-centeredness of hell. He adds, quote, ironically, she is both these things, embittered, pitiable, and most damned of all God's creatures, end quote. The existence of Lilith creates a new dilemma. Accepting it means completely changing the narrative, like I said before, of the biblical original sin. Many scholars discuss the ways in which Christianity dealt with the specific endangering to the narrative. However, I'm more interested in the ways in which scholars have interpreted this development. Blasdell says that Lilith was attributed vampiric attributes and have, over the centuries, contributed to both legend and literary genres, quote, from Medusa to the Sirens to Circe, end quote. Lilith was the original female villain that inspired all of the following ones, in this context, including the original vampire. Blasdell goes on to trace how Lilith existed in the mythology of the Hebrews way before Christianity. He talks about how she was the queen of the underworld and was married to Satan. He says she even acquired a vampirish nature when people came to believe that she cast no shadow and when dead would dry up and return to her primordial state of dust. End quote. From this we can trace back the origins of the vampire and the myths that follow against the exposure to the sun. Quote, furthermore, a myth was popularized that upon meeting the prophet Elijah on the road one day, she told him that she and her demon companions were traveling to a woman expecting a child. Once there, she explained she would put the woman to sleep and take the baby, suck its blood, drain its marrow, and seal up the flesh. End quote. Once again, we get another reference to the current popular myths of vampirism, the sucking of the blood and the sealing up of the flesh. Brow, another scholar on the matter, also registers her research along these lines. As the first Eve, Brown says she was the first woman, perhaps, to challenge masculine supremacy, end quote, which would then explain the monstrosity and physical disgust with which early female vampires / demons / Lilith are described with. Her identification as an evil spirit is generally derived, according to most critics, from the Babylonian Assyrian personification, which later became fused with the Roman Lamia, the Greek Hetera, and the Turkish vampire. Brow says, quote, in Talmudic times, she appears as a female demon, and in Midrashic literature, she is associated with Adam, with whom she begot demons from spirits that attached themselves to him. But only in the alphabet of Ben Sira of the 10th century is she identified for the first time as the first Eve. According to this version, because Lilith was created, as was Adam, from the earth, She insisted upon enjoying full equality with him, the first woman perhaps to challenge masculine supremacy. For example, she was an incestuous criminal who, as, quote, both Lilith and Satan reveal an absence of any human psychology identifiable with the rest of living creatures, Lilith is simply characterized as monstrous and hideous as she is for Milton, projecting no element of beauty. Interestingly, though, the stage of ugliness did not last for long, and Lilith transformed to a beautiful, even desirable, appearance and demon. Quote by Brown, the widespread mood in literature during the Romantic period expressed in dreams of morbidity and eroticism of fatal women, who, because of their beauty, exercise cruelty on men. One would have to accept the notion that quote-unquote diabolical beauty, which crushes, is the archetype which united all forms of seduction, all vices, all delights. Of course, it should be stated, if beauty, as proverbially believed, is in the eye of the beholder, it would then follow that it is not woman who is really at fault, rather it is man who is the victim and unconsciously his own enemy. Rossetti, for one, portrays Lilith in his painting as a beautiful woman with golden hair, and his ballad, Adam Bauer, describes her as alluring. It is with this start that we can trace the transformation of the female vampire from monstrous to beautiful, even desirable, a seductress, and a demon at most. Brown adds on, quote, the painful magical mystery of the female beauty personified in Keats' La Belle Dame sans Merci already reveals a turbid confusion of function, an ideal found in androgyny, which manifests itself towards the end of the century. One can similarly understand the decadent movement through the paintings of Gustave Moreau, in which are vividly expressed ambiguous figures, lascivious and sexless, the personification of the femme fatale. In this sense, too, Lilith, as the embodiment of an ideal, is divested in her female attributes. Another interesting scholar, Brenda Mann Hammock, talks about the fin de siècle authors that Brown mentioned that went towards this androgynous monstrosity in literature and romanticism. Hammock notes that there was an obsession during this time with presenting women as monstrous half/hybrids. Quote, as Leda or Beauty, Io or Lilith, she posed seductively with animal companions. As coiled Medusa, catty Circe, or blossomy Sphinx, she recapitulated in her feral mythical features a history of suspect desires. Whether she was figured as victim or victimizer, as Eve in Eden, or the snake with woman's head, she was ever transgressive, regressive, and perverse. End quote. Hammock goes on to analyze monstrosity in women during this era's literature, and her interesting findings circles around some scientific history about myths surrounding the beauty of quote-unquote hybrids. Here, possibly a new theory arises, degenerate mothers, as these women were supposedly degenerate by sexualizing animals and caring too much for animals and having weird sexual cravings with her partner, were the cause of the hybrid males and thus created the first race of vampire miscegenation. According to Hammock, if degenerate mothers created new races of vampires, then the vampires would propagate by deracinating their victims and propagating them with their own. Here, the narrative shifts again, in which the vampire is not only foreign but also propagating his sickness, a shift from inner source to outer infection that we can see repeated over and over with the theme of vampiric sightings in this era. James Twitchell writes a very interesting paper on La Belle Dame sans Merci, which is definitely worth looking into. He starts by tracing the popularity of the folkloric vampire into the main known and accepted facts about vampires, that 1. They need blood to survive, 2. They need their victims dry but do not kill them. Instead, 3. The victims turn into vampires needing to replenish their lost blood, and finally, no second-generation vampire is particularly happy about being involved. Twitchell goes on to use these 4 characteristics to observe the way in which La Belle Dame contaminates the night, thus changing the story from a rape narrative, as we know it to be, to an infection/attack by a female vampire narrative. Which brings me to my following question. Does that encapsulate the main shift of vampires from female to male, the need to reverse victimization? It goes back to what Brown said earlier, that in this way, man becomes his own victim. This is where Sylvia Kelso's article comes in. The title itself, Constructing Postmodern Bodies, is very interesting as it raises the question, are vampires constructed bodies or are they bodies found as they are? The reason I find this topic interesting is because, just as the subconscious role of victimization is reversed by the reversal of genders in vampire stories, here is another reversal in which the meaningful parts of a reading are not the ones found in the text but the ones attributed by the reader, who is the beholder of the reading. What is then to be considered human? What subject, what bodies are allowed within the law? Knowing everything we know about sexuality, identity, gender, bodies, and self identification, can we really apply all of them to a vampire? Or is there a line to be drawn between quote unquote monster and a human? According to Judith Johnson, vampires foreground the rarely considered binary of alive and dead. They unsettle the crucial position, human not human, forces audiences to confront more nearly the struggles over race and sexuality that lie beneath metaphorical context, without deflection towards either the animal or the machine. My question here, however, is how does it change when the monster slash non-human slash vampire is no more female but male during the Victorian era? As Anya Mukareja shows in her article, My Vampire Boyfriend, there's an attraction to the old gentleman trope, the born old sexy of the vampire genre. That, however, is only ever relevant for contemporary readers. How does it change when the gentleman is also the pure incarnation of evil, whether he acts on it or not in a time where everyone is supposedly a gentleman? Viewing the third quote, in texts like Dracula, vampires, killing offers a powerful threat to masculinity. It is fellatio seen as objecting, violating or corrupting, either to the woman that men own or to the men themselves. Then it was necessary, whether intentionally or not, for the vampire to become almost exclusively male so that it is objecting, violating, or corrupting cannot be done to a man with someone who is lesser than his equal, aka a woman. Finally, in Judith Johnson's paper, she takes it a step further and says, quote, further, if the vampire blood represents homosexual or other taboo erotic choices, then orality as a form of taboo eroticism will be presented as one of the more human and sympathetic rather than the more repellent aspects of the vampire. If vampire blood represents orality, then orality is no longer exploitative. The sexual relationship implied by the vampire's kiss is more an exchange of passion than a rape or an economical enslavement. If vampire relationships has conveniently killed the non-vampire partner, then let the vampire learn self-control and refrain from killing their partners. Orality itself is a metaphor for homoerotic passion, loses its aura of the taboo and becomes a form of mutual nurturance, a joyful and sustaining mode of love. End quote. So then, not only does orality remove the taboo of intersex and same-sex sexual activities, but it also removes the danger of it. The taboo behind fellatio becomes this attractive and dangerous act commonly talked about as part of the discussion for vampires. To Judith Johnson, quote, orality is no longer exploitative. The sexual relationship implied by the vampire's kiss is more an exchange of passion than a rape of an economic enslavement, end quote. The male vampire is not only no longer getting raped or enslaved, but he is also no longer raping nor enslaving. The final shift of vampirism being that, as an eroticized male, the vampire is allowed virtually anything. Still, the question of whether vampires fall under the law plagues me, as I still don't understand what this shift fully means for masculinity or femininity. Following down this rabbit hole of information about the Lilith and the masculinity of vampires and degeneracy of women, etc., made me realize that while facts cannot be refuted, a lot of our research is dejected based on personal readings and personal connections we notice to other texts. How relevant then does it become to focus on sexuality and gender identity in vampiric tales of the Victorian times? Thank you.